I just want to start with gratitude for this opportunity to connect for a conversation with you, Dr. Burt and Jan Marie. Thanks so much for being here. We truly just appreciate your unending dedication to the health and well-being of your patients, doing what is right by them, and ultimately the Hippocratic Oath that you truly embody in your work. Evidence not only in your practice, but also the time and effort that you put into your latest books, Kill Switch and Everyday Miracles. Each of these books calls upon the reader, I believe, and society to awaken to the ethical necessities of informed consent and the possibilities of uniting for the common good. So, thanks for being here for this conversation. To begin, I think I'd just like us to focus on your latest book and invite you to share more about why it was important for you to write Kill Switch.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me. Being able to speak with people and disseminate information is always a pleasure. Of course, this group would, I hope, already have read Everyday Miracles, and if not, I recommend you do it. It's kind of a kitchen soup for the soul, and the story of patients going through transplant, done, of course, with their permission and no last names, and their decision whether they want their first name or not. But I think it'll really bring people up to date. I don't really get into the roadblocks that prevent that type of treatment from going forward, despite what has been overwhelming number of publications that show success for HSCT for MS, including a randomized trial that I completed. But beyond that, there's many, many non-randomized studies and also meta-analysis of, I think there's probably 10 different meta-analysis last time I looked showing superiority of HSCT over the DMTs. So the question is, why aren't people made aware? Why don't neurologists, other doctors tell them? And why do they have trouble getting access to it? Why don't more places do it? And why do some insurance companies still decline it, or you have to fight with many appeals to get them to approve or possibly still decline? And, it should just be standard of care now, not especially in a regimen that's well published, that's already completed a randomized trial, and it should be accepted as such. So the question is, what's going wrong? And the answer to that has to do with the flow of money. So, my patients would say to me, why aren't people talking about this? Why aren't they standing at rooftops saying, HSCT for MS? And I would always say, and I truly believed, well, medicine is a conservative field. We don't want to make false claims. We have to prove our way. And I'd spent 10 years animal models. Then I did a phase 1, phase 2, and a phase 3 randomized trial. And then many subsequent papers publishing everybody we had transplanted on and off study, looking at cost analysis, writing a medical textbook, and even writing Everyday Miracles to help inform patients. And yet, it still doesn't move. And so I've come to realize my patients are right. It's not just that this is a conservative field and we have to prove our way. There's something else holding it up. And obviously, when there's a problem somewhere, it's usually money behind it, and that is the issue. And so I wrote Kill Switch to bring that out. I bring it out especially in the last chapter, the flow of money. And that applies to what's going on in transplant or the failure of people to recognize transplant for autoimmune disease. Um, I don't directly say that in Kill Switch. I apply it to another area. But it does go back to that. And I was actually asked to write a trilogy. And if I ever do the third book, it will get more into this perverse incentives that have arisen with good intentions, well-intentioned laws that have caused people to function in a way that's not in the necessarily in the best interest of their patients, and a failure of our system, our politicians, and our medical health care system, and the people in it to actively recognize that, well, you are there fighting for the physical health of your patient, the mental health of your patient. If you do not have financial health, you don't have health. And I thought this really has also resulted in a lot of confusion and misdirection in this COVID-19. And so when COVID-19 first came out, a postdoc in my lab who had come from China had worked with me for 10 years. And he approached me and said, something's wrong. He's very much aware of the Wuhan Institute. And Dr. Shi, who is the head of it, and her work in viruses, especially coronaviruses. Coronavirus is the virus causing COVID-19. And he said in China, she had the name of Batwoman because coronavirus comes from bats. That's a natural reservoir. And that she was very, very famous because she had NIH funding. And it's very unusual for the National Institutes of Health in America, specifically NIAID, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, to fund a center in China. So she was quite well known, had a lot of things on the internet. And then when COVID-19 came out, he had intermittently followed her. I didn't. I've spoken several times in China. I never spoke in Wuhan. But he approached me and said, something's wrong here. Her website in one night was wiped clean. I looked at it yesterday because of the issues about COVID-19, which is a coronavirus. That's what she works with. All of a sudden, there's nothing. Everything is gone. And I'm like, that is a bit unusual. So I did a little reading, and I saw that there was a publication in a very prestigious research medical journal, Nature Medicine, of the results of working on coronaviruses in a collaboration. Coronavirus is the virus that causes COVID-19, on a collaboration between University of North Carolina and Wuhan in China. And Dr. Shi, the head of the institute there's name was on that publication. And basically what they did, and they admitted doing that, in the paper, they called their research gain of function. Now, what is gain of function? Along the way, with all the controversies arisen, people have changed the name of gain of function, what it really means, how they define it. But gain of function means you take a virus that's not pathogenic to humans, like a coronavirus, infects bats, doesn't harm a human being, and you genetically alter it so that it can be pathogenic and hurt a human being. And they said they did that. They were provided the non-pathogenic coronavirus by Dr. Shi. That's kind of one of the major reasons she was on the paper. And she's the world's reservoir for these coronaviruses. She's collected them, in these bat droppings in caves throughout China. So they genetically altered it. It could infect humans. And then there was an uproar and an editorial in Nature Medicine saying this is dangerous research, and they responded, well, we followed all the rules and there's a lot we can learn from this. And that's absolutely true. You can learn a lot in ways that will come out in the future, not necessarily today or tomorrow, but in the future that could help humanity. But nevertheless, there's something going on once you start changing a virus that's not pathogenic into one that can infect and kill human beings. And you kind of have to step back. What is going on? And so as I looked at it further, I looked at the grants that NIAID had provided for that research at Chapel Hill that had included Wuhan, but no money flowed to them. And then because I had a big NIH grant in the past, and I've been on NIH grant committees, I knew where to look. So I looked for other grants on coronaviruses to Dr. Shi. And following this research at Chapel Hill in North Carolina, gain of function research was shut down for 3 years. And the reason it was shut down by the Obama administration. And the reason is that there were a large number of reports from American virology labs of accidents because they're supposed to report them. Potentially, accidents could be really dangerous, like, 3 a week. It was crazy. So the Obama administration shut down gain of function research, realizing that the proper controls aren't there, and if you're creating new viruses and accidents happen so easily, it could leak out of the lab and become a natural disaster. But so it was shut down by the White House. And then what happened, and the grant was on their website, is NIAID went ahead and funded the research to continue by funding a private company called Echo Health in New York that then funded Wuhan, China to continue the work and the research with some ongoing collaboration with University of North Carolina. And so they continued doing gain of function research in China. And for about 10 years, and I can read these grants, you have to be able to read molecular biology, but I can do that because I spent years in molecular biology lab as a fellow at NIH. So, and, my little group did molecular biology as well in our laboratory work and so forth. So, um, they basically, this group, uh, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Echo Health in New York, and Wuhan, China, had for 10 years searched for a coronavirus that could infect human cells. And when that wasn't successful, they genetically altered the virus. The receptor binding domain, it's called. That's the area of the virus that will bind to a human cell. And they optimized it so it binds very tight to a human cell, which is what you need for infection. That was their first paper, actually, in uh, Nature Medicine, that caused an uproar with the editorial, "Risky research, should this be done?" Well, they continued doing that after it was shut down in America and Wuhan, China, because China, it was new to the ball game. They really uh, didn't have the kind of oversight in America or reporting, and it was getting funding, and it's just continued on there, funded by NIAID, and then COVID-19 hit. So it started to suggest to me that it likely did come from a lab, not from an animal source, animal directly infecting a human being. And there was a lot of controversy about that. And NIH, NIAID really was adamant that it came from an animal, not from the lab that they were funding. In fact, they didn't even tell anybody they were funding that lab, yet it was all there in their grants. You had to be able to read the grants to see that. And I thought, they do kind of deny this too much. It's like their role should be to investigate, determine the source, instead of just upfront denying, and that if you think it came from a lab, you're a conspiracy theorist, which was really the narrative. And the corporate media ran with that. So I looked a little further on the grants, and I found that Echo Health in New York, with Wuhan Lab in China, and with Chapel Hill, the original triumvirate that was doing this work and continuing the work when gain of function was shut down in America, had applied to the Department of Defense for a grant. And that grant was to take a coronavirus that they had already optimized the receptor binding domain so it would infect a human cell, human epithelial cells, the cells that line your lung and trachea and upper airway, that it would infect those cells. They'd already optimized that. They said they'd optimized it. They had publications saying they'd done that. But they asked the Department of Defense to then fund them to optimize the furin cleavage site. So why is that important? Well, the furin cleavage site, what happens for a virus, a respiratory virus, to cause an infection, it has to have the right receptor binding domain, which they'd already created and published they had. And so it will infect a cell. It can then be released inside that cell and begin to spread. But what happens for it? It will form a little epidemic, but not a pandemic, because it'll fizzle out. And the reason it'll fizzle out is it can't spread very fast. But if you add a furin cleavage site, what furin is an enzyme we all carry, humans carry normally in their cells. We have it in our epithelial cells that line our lungs and trachea. And so if the virus infects a cell that contains the furin will cleave if that virus also contains the right furin cleavage site. Well, that site is on the outside of the virus, just like the receptor binding domain. So the receptor binding domain binds, it pulls it into the cell. Normally it opens very slowly, but with the furin cleavage site there, furin cuts it and opens rapidly. When the virus opens up rapidly, because you got to remember it's this protein shell around the viral RNA. When it opens rapidly, the RNA is very rapidly transcribed into protein and to new RNA to make new viruses, tens of thousands of new viruses that then spread rapidly. So what happens once you have the right receptor binding domain, which allows for an epidemic but not a pandemic, it will fizzle out. If you add the furin cleavage site, you will now get a pandemic because it will spread rapidly within a person into other people. So they put in a grant saying that's what they were going to do. They were going to search for the optimal furin cleavage site. And if they can't find it, they were going to insert it. That's what they said in their grant. Now, the Department of Defense did not fund it. It's interesting that this work was going to be done in Wuhan, China, in collaboration with EcoHealth in New York, run by a British virologist, and Chapel Hill in North Carolina, a very prestigious university, but it was going to be done mostly in China. It's interesting that they would be funding this, and the reason they were asking is because gain of function was still supposed to be closed in America. And so what happened is, even though NIAID was funding it in Wuhan, so for this next grant for the furin cleavage site, the Department of Defense declined to fund it. And the reason given, I don't know all the reasons, but the reason given was because gain of function is illegal. They weren't going to fund it in China if it can't be funded in America from two American centers. So it stopped. But and so you can say, okay, so there's no evidence that they did that in China. But I've run a lab. I was very dependent on money to keep the lab going. Everybody is when you do it. The money isn't given to you. And at a university, you got to bring in money for the university. They don't bring money to you. You have to bring it in, and they get the indirects on your grant so they can run their system. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to be welcome there for too long. So what all investigators do, all of them, is there's a catch-22 when you're running a lab and you're dependent on funding. And that catch-22 is that to get money, you have to have data. But to get data, you have to have a grant with money. So you're in this catch-22. Because they're not going to do it on an idea. You got to have the data, but you got to have the money to get the data. So the way everybody does it, is when they have a grant and they're doing their research, they do some other research with that money that they can use to fund the next grant, to say, look at these exciting results so that they can get funding for the next grant. Everybody does that.
In my
So,
experience, it's about like 10% of the budget that you can move without permissions, right? Like,
well, actually, you can move it however you want.
sure.
As long, I mean, I'm not talking about using it for a trip to
No,
Fiji.
but yeah, to
I'm saying for the
create this
research.
pilot,
Yeah, when you're working with a virus and you move it for a slightly different area, it's expected, of course, if you discover something, you investigate it.
right?
But people know to do that so they can fund the next grant. Uh, and the question is then, did Wuhan do that? Did they go ahead and insert the furin cleavage site that they said they wanted to do but didn't get funding to do? Did they use resources from their ongoing funding from America, NIAID or NIH, to do that? Well, we don't know, but the honest truth is, logically, that's what everyone would do. So now they have the next step to reapply for a new grant. Well, lo and behold, when this virus outbreak occurred and hit America and hit the world, it turns out that that coronavirus carries the exact same genetic signature of what they had done, receptor binding domain, and what they wanted to do and said they wanted to do, and it put into a grant, furin cleavage site. That grant they submitted in 2018, so they're probably writing it in 2017. It was rejected, and this came out the very end, November, December of 2019. So the question is, did they do that or not? Well, it's all a bit circumstantial, but it's very strong circumstantial evidence that that's what happened, and nobody wanted to investigate it. Nobody, and the NIH denied it. But the problem is, the NIH had their fingers on the scale because if that had happened, it would incriminate the NIH. And there could be a lot of bad fallout because millions of people are dying and jobs are lost, families are destroyed, a lot of bad things happen. It could ruin careers. It could also possibly result in some sort of criminal investigation. So they had an interest in making sure the story went in one direction. And they did that. And that was a paper published uh, again in, I think it was Nature Medicine, by an investigator, Anderson, at Scripps. And he's an excellent virologist, but he initially, when he sequenced the COVID-19 virus in the early days, he realized, oh my goodness, it had this man-made imprint in it
Signature.
of
Yeah.
the receptor binding domain and inferring cleavage site. So he emailed a guy that's big in virology, you know, who was in England and then afterwards joined WHO, World Health Organization, and said, look, this looks man-made. So that guy immediately contacted Fauci, head of NIAID, said that to him. And the reason I know this is because of Freedom of Information Act, where the US Congress demanded the NIH release those emails, which the NIH had fought, but they lost because of Freedom of Information Act, so they had to release it. And so he emailed Fauci to talk to Anderson, and Fauci talked to him that day. And Fauci's initial email reaction was, if this is the case, we got to notify FBI, and you know, this needs to be investigated. But then it was clear at that moment from his emails he had no idea they were funding him, and he must have very rapidly found out, because then it all changed, and there was a lot of pressure on Anderson to say it looks like it came out of nature and it wasn't man-made. But the problem was, there's no, all the animals, they had looked at them and none of them carried this coronavirus causing COVID-19. They carried the non-pathogenic coronaviruses for humans, non-pathogenic. So Anderson then even emailed back to Fauci and the other people in this who were very much above him and could control his grant funding, saying, this is dangerous. It could come back to hurt us. We can't say it was uh,
Lab made.
not
Yeah.
not created in a lab. But something happened, and he was convinced to say that. And so they came out with this paper saying that there's absolutely no evidence this could have been made in a lab. When in fact, when he first looked at it, that was his conclusion. But he was pushed to come up with a different conclusion by the people who controlled his funding. So you could say, what happened there? Did he honestly make that change in his assessment? And if you look at the paper and you understand molecular biology, they have no proof of it coming from an animal or from a lab. They have none. They have a suspicion because of the two markers and the grant funding that it came from the lab, but they have no proof where it came from. Yet they said definitively it couldn't have come from nature. And you could say, well, why would that happen? Well, the problem is, if he had stuck to his beliefs that it looks like it came from a lab, those people wouldn't join him on the paper. He would have trouble getting it published in a prestigious journal. In fact, in his emails, when they wrote the paper and came to conclusion that it came from an animal, he wrote Nature Medicine saying Fauci and these other prestigious people, including Francis Collins, head of NIH, had helped him, and they've come to the conclusion that to dispel conspiracy theories, that they can show that this did not come from a lab, and they wanted to publish it, and would the editor support them? And of course, the editor supported them. It's a hot thing, COVID-19 at that time. Where did it come from? And here you have all these prestigious names saying, "Well, the data says, it comes from an animal." So, the problem is after that, Fauci, I saw him. He got up on the lecture stand and said, "Look, here's this prestigious articles. All these virologists, they say it came from animals, it didn't come from a lab." He didn't say, "Look, I was there coordinating this paper and was behind the scenes holding $6 billion in annual funding that we determine where it goes, advising them that, how this should read." He never said that. He didn't recluse himself. He had a big conflict of interest. And so did Collins, the director of the NIH. And again, I don't think in their minds it was intentional. I think they just got so wrapped up in it, they lost sight of what they were doing. And they certainly didn't fund it to intentionally cause this problem, but they didn't recognize this as being a serious issue. Even after the White House has shut it down in America, they went ahead and funded it in China. Well, accidents happen in labs. They just do. They happen in the best of American labs, as the reason they shut it down is they were seeing so many accidents occurring and being reported. In China, they didn't even report if accidents occurred, and this was their first lab. What could go wrong? So, and to this day now, we are more than 5 years since the pandemic. There's never been an animal source documented for COVID-19.
Or an independent investigation?
Well, there was an attempt. There was a call for WHO to do an investigation, and WHO sent 10 people, and one of them was Peter Dziak, who's head of EcoHealth, over to China. Now he has a big conflict of interest. He got the grant to continue the gain of function research and had submitted as a PI the grant from the others to search for the furin cleavage site, which none of them happened to mention. The reason we know that is that a major in the U.S. Army had uncovered that grant. It had sat there for over a year. He uncovered it, and he recognized what it meant. He wrote a report to the Inspector General. So the Department of Defense came to the conclusion that this was man-made. Very much different than the conclusion of NIH. But the Department of Defense didn't have a conflict of interest because they didn't fund it. NIH did. So, the preponderance of evidence looks like it came out of Wuhan, funded by NIAID or NIH, and that the technology originated in America, most likely from North Carolina, from the universities there. And the problem is, to investigate it further, you have to actually launch a criminal investigation. You have to go in and look at lab books. You have to interview people in the lab. You have to look at records of what was shipped when to where. Did they in North Carolina, did they ship the sequence of the furin cleavage science domain to China? If you can show this stuff, I think you can conclusively draw a conclusion what happened, but that's never been done. Never. And with
Yeah, well, I mean,
Biden
on
giving,
page
go ahead.
on page 79, you talk about and pose the question, can government agencies and institutions be trusted to impartially self-investigate and offer examples of why maybe they can't? But I think even in the vein of like pharmaceuticals and their similar self-investigations, right? Can they be trusted to run thorough trials? You talk about vaccines being compromised with the addition of myelin to cause this EAE condition, which in mice is similar to MS. So, how do we as consumers or patients, how can we be confident that even current vaccines don't contain these contaminants that cause other issues?
So those are all excellent questions. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I think vaccines are a kill switch to pandemics, but we need other kill switches so that things like this don't happen. And especially
Controls,
once you
processes, procedures. Yeah.
especially once you're creating new pathogenic viruses that can kill humans that have never existed before on this planet. And that's ongoing. And so I wanted people to be aware. And so I started from the beginning back with smallpox and the initial ways developing vaccines up to the present day. And I had to expose you a little bit of molecular biology. So I hope you enjoyed that. I try to make it easy, but then we go in because currently, a lot of these viruses are made by totally changing the genes and making a new virus. So, and what happens when you have new technology, the regulation falls behind. It's not till there's a disaster that people realize, well, we've got to look at how to better regulate this. And one of the reasons I wanted this book out there is because that really didn't happen. It's like COVID-19's over, we've forgotten about it. This was a giant red flag. It killed millions in America. It destroyed our economy. It added trillions in debt. It destroyed families. It destroyed personal freedom. It caused tremendous controversy, and yet I don't think we learned from it. And those safeguards, those kill switches, haven't been inserted. And so I talk about a kill switch, and one of the kill switches you can do with if you make a new virus that's never existed on this planet before is insert a suicide gene. I know because about 25 years ago, I did that. I inserted a suicide gene in lymphocytes that we gave people for allotransplant. When they got GVHD, we activated it. GVHD stopped immediately. I was awarded Leukemia Scholar of America for doing that. And then, I moved on to autoimmune diseases. But I'm saying that not to say I did this great thing, although it was a very cool thing, but because this technology is old. It's easy to insert a kill switch into a virus, which we did. We used a viral backbone with a kill switch in it so that we could terminate these lymphocytes if a patient got GVHD, and it worked beautiful. So they can. What I'm saying is that's 25 years ago. You can insert a kill switch if you want to take that step. If you're creating a new virus, we weren't creating an infectious virus, but if you are creating a new infectious virus that no immune system has ever been exposed to and is obviously going to cause a lot of havoc and deaths, you should insert a kill switch in case it leaks out of the lab, because obviously you're doing it just for general knowledge, which in a distant future can help humanity, but up front you run the risk if it breaks out. A lot of people are going to suffer. And so I needed people to understand that, and that they could have put a kill switch in the virus. It was never done because it wasn't taken serious. Even though the White House took it serious and shut it down in America, NIH just went on and continued funding it in China, which is weird. For you and me, that would be money laundering. If we're told we can't do something and we use the money in a different way to do the same thing, that's money laundering. But for a federal bureaucracy, that's just the way they do business, and nobody
Flow
holds them
through,
accountable. So
redirection.
and then a kill switch, what I bring up is you and I, as a civilian, are not allowed to investigate ourselves because obviously we'd have a bias. But every city, state, county, and federal government or department can investigate themselves and say this is the answer. But they have an inherent bias because there's a lot of people in those agencies who know if they don't toe the line with what they're supposed to show, they're not going to get promoted. They may get fired. They may not. They will suffer. So they're motivated not to be independent. There's a bias in the system that we've all accepted. That needs to change, but it's going to take a broad recognition for our society that it be investigated outside of the agency or department that does it. As an example, now, again, I don't want this misunderstood. There's a lot of great police. There are. And we need police. We need a safe society. And one of the people that wrote a nice review in the book is former chief of police of Kansas City, Missouri, who's a friend of mine. But there have been repeated times where a citizen, a civilian, has said the police abused them and beat them up or did a lot of inappropriate things, and the police saying no, that's not the case. Well, if you don't have video proof, you have to accept what the police say. Otherwise, you don't have a police force. But then when the video comes out, when there's video evidence, all of a sudden there's a realization, hey, even though the police say they investigated, there's nothing to see here, they did do wrong. and then it goes to an outside agency to investigate that police department in that accident, and then the correct conclusion comes about. So this goes on all the time. It's kind of a quisling behavior because of the internal fortitude and strength and sacrifice on the short term to do the right thing for people in the society in the long term. Humanity and individuals are pushed not to do that by the system. So we need to figure out a way that these investigations, if the NIH is involved in sending the money, they shouldn't be doing the investigation. In fact, when the Department of Defense did it, they found that it likely came from Wuhan. So you need outside investigations, at least a different agency. It's the same government, which can have some interplay if there's pressure from the top to get the same results, but at least you're getting some independence. It's like an outside agency that's part of the federal government investigating a local police force, where the video shows a different result than what they concluded, that there was no harm done here, at least didn't do anything wrong. So we need that outside investigation. That's a kill switch. It's real important on what's going on in our society. And if you don't have that, you have people begin to lose confidence in our institutions. And once that happens, we don't have a functioning society. And so I bring out the importance of kill switches, other kill switches besides outside investigation, besides inserting a suicide gene, which should just be done. And still, nobody's saying we need to do that when you're dealing with creating new lethal viruses, is a very fundamental one, is consent. You have to give honest, open consent. And so I say it's absolutely true, and we tend to forget this, is that the only real difference between stealing and a gift is consent. That's the difference. Otherwise, something that yours, someone else has. But because it was done with consent, it's a gift and everybody's happy. If it's stolen, well, there are problems. It's consent. Making love and rape, the difference is consent. That's the key. And when we give a drug or a vaccine or a treatment to a patient as a physician, we have to have that consent or it's assault. And unfortunately, with COVID-19, new vaccines that had never been tested before were rammed down the throat, and physicians were threatened that they would lose their license if they questioned it and didn't push it on to patients instead of letting the patient make the decision. Look, if the vaccine works, you don't have to worry if your neighbor didn't get the vaccine. You're protected. And your loved ones, if they agree with you, are protected. If it doesn't work, well, why are you getting it anyway? And it's fundamental in medicine, respect for the individual. Respect for the individual meaning let them make the decision. It's their life. If they should decide not to do it, that's their choice. So what the respect for the individual came out of the Belmont Report, which came out of the Nazi atrocities in World War II, experimenting on human beings, without their consent. And so it was recognized that there'd been a lot of that going on in medical research. And so they came up with fundamental principles that became the background of all these FDA regulations. And there were three fundamental principles out of that Belmont report. And one of them was respect for the individual. You cannot have respect. You cannot give that individual respect if you do not get honest, open consent. You have to tell them the good and the bad and let them decide.
Make their own best
Yeah.
informed decision.
And what's not known. You have to just be honest with them. And that was totally missed when it comes to vaccines. So then I'm like, well, why does this go against what should be so ethically ingrained in us? And that takes us to the last chapter, the flow of money.
Mm-hmm.
And there were good intentions. And one of them was the Bayh-Dole. And the Bayh-Dole Act was by two U.S. senators, a Democrat Bayh and a Republican Dole, Indiana and Kansas. And they worked together and they said, look, the NIH does research and then they find some good things at the end of the day, it just kind of sits there. So we want to get it to the bedside of people. How can we do that? So what the Bayh-Dole Act said is that the university will own the research intellectual property rights, because the university would be motivated to license it out to a drug company. And that did succeed. That's what's going on. But the result of that is the university shares in the profit from the drug company. It depends on the contract the university decides to give to the drug company. The university is calling the shots. And you have to realize research is like gold mining. Most of the time you get nothing. And the American taxpayer pays for it most of the time. If you hit a gold mine, the drug companies can sit back. They don't have to waste any money on research. They just come in and say, we want this license to us. We didn't have to spend any money on research. The American taxpayer paid for it, but we're going to get it. And we will now, because of Bayh-Dole, give the university for giving it to us 5, 6, 7% of profits before tax. That's how it works. So whenever you buy these drugs now that have a patent on them, if it was funded by American taxpayer, which a lot of it has been, not in what I did with transplant for autoimmune disease, there's no drug company involved. But when it is funded by the government and it's licensed to a drug company, the universities share in the profit. So does the NIH. So does the drug company. Well, what a corporation, if you go back to the definition, it comes from Latin corpus, meaning a body, one body that shares in the results of their efforts. And that's what's going on. We've created a giant corporation, NIH, universities, and drug companies. Instead of being a check and balance on each other, they share in the profits. They're on the same loot train. And so things have changed. So like what I do doesn't need FDA approval, and the FDA will never approve it because that approval is to be able to have a monopoly on a license. And I didn't do it for that reason. I just wanted to help humanity. And the drugs we use, Cytoxin ATG, they've long since had their patents expire. Nobody gets a profit of it. Nobody's interested in it. Even the universities are not interested in it because there's no money to them. But if you get something the taxpayer paid for that the drug company develops, the university shares in the profit, and so does NIH. The problem is the taxpayer who paid for it gets nothing. So in the old days, you would invest in a company. And if you made a good decision, the company made profit, you made money. If you didn't make a good decision and the company fell apart, you lose your money. But you took the risk, you get the benefit. It makes sense. That's not the case now. The people paying the American taxpayer get nothing but a very big bill at the end of the day that funds the drug companies that didn't pay for the research, funds the universities, and funds NIH. So to show how much money is involved, if you look at again, it was a Freedom of Information disclosure that the courts mandated because the NIH didn't want to do it. In 1 year, 2022, with all the vaccines ongoing for COVID-19, which are shared profits between drug companies and NIH. But in that 1 year, the NIH reported that the drug companies paid the NIH $750 million, $750 million went to them in 1 year. The taxpayers funded it and they got nothing out of it. And that was from everything that they had been doing. And how much the universities got was never disclosed because there's a lot of different universities, but I know they get that. So
Surely not
they
comparable.
have been influenced by the flow of money to push patented drugs with drug companies to do something that you don't patent. A stem cell is a patient's own cell. We can't patent it. We don't want to. In the old days, when I first grew up as an investigator in medicine, that was the ideal. You do something to help humanity, not to make profit for you or the institution. And then you were applauded. Now, the institutions aren't, the truth is they're not that interested in it because there's not the money in it for them. And that's a result of the Bayh-Dole Act. And the truth is the investigators whose hard work, whose determination, whose creativity developed it get very little of the money. It goes to the bureaucracy of the university. Well, this can be changed so that the investigator gets some money, but not as much, and the rest goes back to make sure there's not exorbitant charges on the taxpayer who actually funded it. But our elected leaders have to be aware of this, and most of them aren't. Now, as you can see, there's a forward by Senator Kirk of Illinois. He's very much aware of it, and he wants to help. But how do you change this system? And the problems is, again, there was another thing that happened. Two things, changes in the law in my lifetime that allowed this to occur. And one is drug companies are allowed to advertise. There's
Yeah, that's awful.
two countries in the world, and that is America and New Zealand. Those are the only two. But drug companies put a lot of money in advertising. They don't have to put it in research. They just wait for university to do it, funded by the taxpayer, and they get a license from the university, and on they go. But they can then put a lot of money into advertising. Well, advertising influences people with subliminal messages of happy, smiling, good-looking people who took the drug, guilty people who didn't give the drug to their family. It happens. There's no a priori regulation over what they do. They're just allowed to do it. And who's ever doing that advertising gets the money, whether it's YouTube or a newspaper or news program. So if you look at a news program, and I'm just going to say this again, I don't want to upset anybody. This isn't political. But if you look at Fox News, Brett Baer makes 50 million or more a year. If you look at MSNBC, Rachel Maddow makes the same amount of money a year. They're totally, quote, different spectrum, but they make that money. That money, the majority of it comes from drug company advertising of
Advertisement.
the news. So there's no incentive for a news network to look at the
Change.
profit of a drug company, whether it's a vaccine or anything, because the drug company will shut off funding to them. There will be no more advertising. Their high profits are going to be gone. The executives of the company would be upset, but them personally making that kind of money, that's how they make that kind of money. Drug company advertising. And it influences what they say, what they want to get out there. So that needs to be retracted. We shouldn't have drug companies advertising. That needs to stop. But that is the current law in America. And the other is PACs, political action committees.
Mm.
So what happened, this again, was the Supreme Court of the United States, and I bring that out in there, it was Citizens United, American Citizens United against the US government, because the US government had said a PAC, you can give as much money as you want to a PAC, and they can do whatever they want with it to influence an election. And so Citizens United said you can't allow that, that's corruption. The US Supreme Court agreed with the PACs, and they said you can't restrict the amount of money you give to a political action committee because that will inhibit freedom of speech. Well, I believe the Supreme Court confused freedom of speech with freedom to deceive. So you and I, as individuals, cannot give a candidate more than $2,000 or we can go to prison. But if you're a corporation or an extremely wealthy individual, a billionaire, you can give unlimited money, tens of millions, hundreds of millions to a PAC, political action committee, and they can use that money to advertise for or against any candidate they want. And then us as citizens, if you don't know that person, you get this information and it just kind of changes your mind, and it influences an election. It buys elections. It allows companies and billionaires to buy elections legally because it's called freedom of speech. That's not freedom of speech. The problem is there is nobody in the Congress that can change that because the Supreme Court said that's the law of the land. You have to have the Supreme Court change their opinion. And in dissent, Justice Stevens wrote how wrong a decision this was, how it flies against the common sense of the American public. But the Supreme Court, on the concept of freedom of speech, legalized corruption, buying elections. And so if you're a candidate, you need a lot of money for your campaign. And if a PAC comes to you and says, look, we need you to support this or that. If a drug company gives money to a PAC and they come to you and say, we need you to support this, well, you get a lot of money and you do it. If you don't, they're going to advertise against you, especially if they view an important vote coming up and you're a threat. And as freedom of speech, they can say any awful thing about your behavior and paint you as a villain, and we don't know the truth of what is what. And so these campaigns have become ridiculously expensive because of PACs. So we have to change that. But the problem is the Supreme Court has to change that now. And how do you get the Supreme Court to readdress what they did? They're not even aware of it, I don't think. Well, politicians can change the law to say, okay, this is legal for a PAC, but what we're going to say is the PAC, whenever they advertise anywhere, they have to put in very bold, large print the money of the PAC administrators and the money of the donors. And if it's a company, the name of the chairman of the board and the CEO. they would have to do that. That would put a little small check on balance on what they're doing, because people will start waking up. Why are they doing this? Is it good of society? Is it for their own interest? Why are they giving 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 million to this pact? Is it just they're trying to help society? No. You have to know, once you have names and companies and billionaires, you can begin to unravel where where the flow of money is going that benefits them against the good of society. But to do that, you got to have senators and congressmen that will vote for it. And the problem is, right now, a PAC can come in and say, if you vote for this, we're going to terrorize you in the next election. Or if you vote the way we want to allow this to continue, we're going to give you a lot of money. So we've got ourselves as a country in a catch-22, where an honest senator or congressman cannot break the cycle of money that is going on against the best interest of the patient. And so I don't bring that out in this book, but that's what's happened. Why transplant for autoimmune diseases like MS is ignored by our society. So all neurologists want the best for the patient. No neurologist gets up to say, how can I screw my patient? I don't want to do this for my patient. But they are told repeatedly by thousands of people from so many drug companies about this drug and that drug and that drug. My lone voice, because I have no drug company, gets drowned out. So what they'll do is they'll give Ocrevus $60,000 an infusion. 2 weeks later, another $60,000, and $60,000 every 6 months. So high fives, because the MRIs don't change. They're not having acute relapses. But a lot of the patients go on to develop progressive neurologic disease because they're only targeting one arm of the immune system, the B cell. They're not targeting the T cell, and you get smoldering T cell chronic inflammation with slow ongoing damage until the neurons are so bad and you're much worse off. And then nothing can help you. So that has infiltrated into the system. And the hospitals and the universities will give their doctors a bonus at the end of the year for RVUs, meaning the more money they collected, they'll share some back to them, which is also a corrosive reward on people's behavior that goes against the general good of their patient. So again, in the old days, MS was treated by targeting T cell. And when I first started transplant for autoimmune disease, I worked in animal models of autoimmune disease like EAE. We can adoptively transfer EAE or MS in an animal by transferring T cells. We can't do it with B cells. They work together. The immune system, the different cells in the immune system always work together, but the main cell that transfers the disease and initiates it in animal models is the T cell. Yet Ocrevus doesn't touch that. It's totally ignored because of the false readings of the MRI, the false comfort. And yet when I bring this up, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't change because there's a really big financial reward of perverse incentives where everybody wins except the patient. So I wanted people to understand what happened with COVID-19 and how we have to have checks and balances. We have to have kill switches for making these new wicked viruses, which we are still doing. Without that, with this lesson hasn't been learned. And that generally kill switches of all types, especially informed consent, are important. And I don't believe, because of the way our system has changed in the flow of money in this big cycle with money in the hands of a few, that the average person out there who's paying for these advances is even aware of the flow of money or given honest consent, not only about their own treatment and option, but what's going on. And so,
Well,
I
even, I
thought,
mean, I don't know that they could understand, right? So the National Literacy Institute has just released statistics that about 54% of adults read below a sixth grade level, and 21% are classified as functionally illiterate. So they struggle with tasks like even navigating digital materials or certainly reading and understanding them, right? Like, how do we help even the illiterate population start to understand they've got to ask more questions and they need to gain more of this understanding, even to be truly informed and
yeah.
consent to treatment?
Well, this is, we're all learning all the time. I have personally found for my patients, now I probably have a select group of patients because they find me, they're very well educated. and they've read and they thought through this. Um, and so, you know, I've been, sometimes I think my patients know more than the physicians caring for them. Now, I'm not going to have a friendly response from physicians for that, but I've kind of like the patients know something's wrong, and they know when they keep complaining these symptoms and they're just ignored, something's wrong, and these bills keep piling up. They know something's wrong, but they can't quite put it together. And so again, if I ever do the third volume of this, I'll tie it all together. But kill switch is an important one to get an idea on the flow of money and how it has given perverse incentives to our society, as well as the history of viruses, how we started and where we ended up where we are. And this
The
is really
need for
important
systems
because
change.
even though I knew this, I was even afraid to write kill switch for fear someone would say I'm an anti-vaxxer. I'm not. Vaccines are a kill switch for pandemic. But it's like radiation treats cancer, but radiation causes cancer. We have to have kill switches on the abuse of vaccines and manipulation of viruses as well. We have to. So I wrote this for people without a background in molecular biology or medicine to get a good understanding, which hopefully most people will be able to get. Because I think the more people know, that's the first step in bringing about change in a system that, with good intentions, each step along the way, nobody was trying to do the wrong thing, but it's ended up in a system of perverse incentives that go against the best interest of the patient. And that's why I wanted to write that. And I learned because my patients were always saying to me, it's the drug company, there's something wrong here. And I was just like, no, medicine's really conservative. We have to prove our way. And after everything I did, I realized, well, hey, the patients are right. And it really came out when I started investigating, when I knew something was wrong with COVID-19. Once I'd read the grants, I knew something was wrong. Now, I did tell a major international news corporation that people watch all the time here in America, because I know the reporter. I've been interviewed him by before. He took it up chain of command to a producer. This is back in 2000, January of 2020. The producer just emailed me, well, these are complicated. If we have a question, can we contact you? I said, yeah. I never heard from them, and they went down another direction totally. That anybody who says it was developed in the lab is a conspiracy theorist. So they knew from the beginning. I even gave them the grants. Now, I can say, unless you're trained in molecular biology, you're probably not going to understand those grants. So they probably didn't understand it, but they could have had an outside independent person look at those grants to tell them, because I told them what they were saying. And they to this day, I went back to them. I said, "Here's kill switch," and they refuse to interview me or even talk about it. It's like they don't want to admit their culpability in what happened. Well, that's not what a news organization should do. But again, there would be disincentives for financially uh, having advertisement on their program if they did that. As a result, because drug companies can advertise as much as they want, where they want. And, again, we're up against the concept that they can advertise whenever they want, that the Bayh-Dole Act allows the taxpayer to pay for it, but for the drug company, the university, and NIH to get the profit, money does direct human behavior.
You
Both
asked the
good and bad.
question in the book, right? How did our system become so frightening? And
Yeah.
it seems as though it is that chase of money and greed.
Yes.
Is
Yes.
it so in
And then
other
the final is
countries?
PACs. PACs really need to be terminated, but who can do it with our Supreme Court? They're the final say. They're saying this is freedom of speech for a corporation, which is such a joke. You and I can only give 2,000. A corporation or a billionaire going through a pact can give as much money as they want.
And then write it off on their taxes.
Yes.
Even more incentive, right?
So,
So it's not that way in other
and there's
countries,
also
though, right?
a fear when you say this stuff that, people will respond to you in a negative way. And I'm like, no, this isn't against vaccinations. Vaccinations have saved hundreds of millions of lives. Billions of people wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for vaccines. And I bring that out in the book. But the scales are tilting the other way now. We always need to look what's going on and adjust things fairly. and transparently. And these points I bring up about the importance of kill switches, including not allowing self-investigation, which is what happens all the time. And that's got to change. It's got to, but it means a change within our governmental structure itself. They're not motivated to do that. They want to investigate themselves. So they've like lost the connection of before they were a part of the government, that, they're first a human being, so somehow we need to get outside investigation as an important kill switch into our governmental system, all branches of government. And these how to do that is beyond me. All I can do is bring these issues out in this book. So it's a historical perspective. You're going to learn a lot, but it brings up a lot of serious questions for people to think about how good intentions can go bad. Again, it's like that movie, the show Breaking Bad. At each point, the main character made a decision that seemed logical at that one moment, but he ended up in a very horrible place, doing a lot of horrible things, Breaking Bad. And I think that's what's happened here. There's a lot of good intentions that went bad, but once you have that flow of money and the people involved in that flow benefiting from it, it is really, really difficult to break it, and much less understand it. So I brought this out so people will understand. That's all I can do.
Hopefully begin
Make people
valuing, right?
is hmm?
Well, hopefully begin valuing inquiry
Yeah,
and just even the checks and balances and knowing more and being informed consumers of what they're seeing, reading, digesting,
and again, I'm
injecting.
I'm not against meritocracy. I've started based on the patents. We have a small biotech company. Investors have to make money. I understand that. I'm not against that per se, but once the scales become so tilted, then there are issues that need to be addressed, and that's what I'm trying to bring out in there.
Lots of opportunity for systems change, for
Yeah.
sure.
So how do we get this book into every senator's hands, every doctor's hands, every researcher's hands?
Well,
I
that's a
mean,
good
there's so
question, because the major news organizations won't interview me. So, it's just going to have to be word of mouth. Now, I did take the initiative. I mailed it to every US senator and a large number of congressmen. And a few senators, to my surprise, wrote back to me and thanked me, but very few, like two, of 100. But at least two did write back, which was impressive, because I can imagine a lot of this is handled by their staff and they don't have time to read a book. But I figure if it's sitting in their office and some staff member picks it up, that's going to be beneficial. So that's why I did that. But yeah, it's just uh, getting the
Continuing the
information.
conversation. Yeah.
And then to help, this flow of money is what has inhibited people being aware of HSCT for multiple sclerosis. And the last thing I can do to help is to get more information out. And so one of the last things I'm going to do is going through the IRB right now is get the long-term follow-up for my MS patients, because nobody reports that. So I know patients have contacted me 24 years out, 18 years out, still doing great. No drugs, got better, stayed better. But that could be a biased selection of people contacting me. So I want to get that data, and whatever it shows, get it published, because drug companies don't report on 2 years. And I reported out to 5 years, but there were still people hadn't hit the 5 year mark, I haven't reported beyond that. No drug company does, but I think that's the last thing I can contribute to the field to help patients. And right now, I still transplant MS, but as my IPS work develops, which holds so much promise for aging and chronic degenerative disorders, that it may overwhelm me. I'll have to again just give up taking care of MS patients with HSCT, and I want others to do it. I'm not trying to not share. I want others to know. So the last thing I can do to help the field is those long-term follow-up papers for the diseases I've done, and I'm working to get that approval now so that we can do that. And I think after that, I've done what I can do for HSCT for MS. And again, there are a lot of details in there. It's the regimen you use that's very, very important. Patient selection is very, very important. But those are other conversations and topics. And if anybody has a question, I recommend read Everyday Miracles. That'll really
Such a
help
great
explain
book.
things.
Well, and so clearly we'll continue the conversation, right? Because we'd love to be part of that journey of following up. I mean, with the podcast interviews that I've conducted of people transplanted by you 20 plus years out, right? And the stories are phenomenal. I'm also looking for the stories of struggle, of stories where people haven't done as well, right? Because potentially there are non-responders or other infections or
Well,
complications
we
that
learn
come
from
up.
failures. We do,
Yeah,
but we have to get the information out from failure as well.
right. So we want to hear from everyone. We really
But
appreciate.
anyway, as a caveat, I always, when I first had this idea of HSCT for autoimmune diseases, I was a long time ago. I was That's in the last century, literally. And I thought I'd have all the answers in 5 years. It doesn't work that way. So getting this data out, the process slows everything down. We, we will get it done, but it takes time.
Of course it does. Well, we
Well, Dr.
appreciate.
Burt,
Go
I
ahead.
have
Yes.
one question. We get a lot of discussion from people that have had HSCT all over the world. Do I revaccinate? And I had one doctor say, people check their titer levels after HSCT, 6 months to a year after, to see which of their childhood vaccines they've retained. But they never check before HSCT. So how many do we really retain?
Well, the
And
majority
how
of my
many?
patients, when a patient asks me that, I say, check your titers. If you have titers, you don't need the vaccine.
Right.
And the majority of patients actually have titers, only a few don't. So, using the non-myeloablative regimen I use. Now, with a more
Right.
aggressive beam ATG regimen, myeloablative lymphoma regimen that a lot of centers use in America, I don't know. They may not have adequate titers or titers at all, but a majority of mine do. And once you have the titer, you don't need the vaccine. You just don't. That's been a long
But I
established.
guess
You have
I guess my
immunity.
question is how many do we retain as a normal adult that doesn't have MS, that does not have HSCT, that's never had cancer? How
Well,
many
so yeah,
people
so we don't do it before because
right
the information's not helpful. We I recommend patients check it after, and if
after?
if
Okay.
if they have a titer, they don't need the vaccine. It's their choice if they want it, as a booster, but the
Yeah.
titers when you don't need it.
Okay.
Yeah, because what the vaccine does is it produces antibodies to the virus. You already have them. That's what the titer means. So
Yeah.
you,
Yep.
you don't,
Yep.
don't, there's no
But I'm just
sense.
wondering, as a 55-year-old woman, do I still have teeters to measles, even if I didn't have HSCT? Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm just
Right.
wondering if naturally, you know,
Yeah.
like people
Well,
people check after HSCT,
those
but
cells that make those antibodies are very, very, very long-lived.
okay.
But the levels can decline with age. So, like if you step on a rusty nail and you've had a prior tetanus vaccine, you know, my bias is get the vaccine just because you want to, tetanus can be a real problem if it takes off. And it's not a
Right, right.
prophylaxis, it's stepping on a nail. But if you want to get it without ever having risk of getting it, not stepping on a rusty nail or whatever, and you have an adequate titer, you don't need it. But at the moment
Right,
you
right.
step on it, it's always good to get a booster.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you make that distinction, right? That outside of a host cell, a virus is inert and no more alive than a rock. So maybe just following up on that, can you explain how antibodies remain in our body, like after an infection, without joining forces with a cell to reactivate or cause infection? Like a lot of us are living with Epstein-Barr virus antibodies. My
Yeah.
levels are very high still. So how do we know
Well,
that they won't
Epstein-Barr
be?
virus, I could have done a whole encyclopedia on viruses, and I kind of wanted to, but the publisher is very adamant people won't read more than 50,000 words, and it was already 70,000 words, so I had to stop. But the herpes viruses are a unique type of virus because once we're exposed to them, and I'm sure I'm positive for all the herpes virus because I've been around hospitals my entire career, and most people are positive, so I've probably picked them up. But they live with you for the rest of your life, and they hide in a cell. The herpes viruses hide in neurons, basically, like a cold sore. It hides in a neuron, and then when you get stressed, you get an illness, or you get emotionally stressed, or whatever, lose your job, whatever, you can see a cold sore appear. It comes out, and then it goes away. So you already have immunity to it, but your immune system won't attack it once it's hidden inside your neuron, your own cell. When it comes out from the neuron to the skin epithelial cells and start to blister out, your immune system corners it and attacks it. And that's why it mostly fades away and disappears. Of course, there are exceptions. If it's reactivated coming over the eye where it can cause a cataract, you need to treat emergently to help your immune system, if you have antibodies to it, to stop it before you develop scarring on the lens itself. But for the most part, whether you put a little acyclovir on your lip lesion or not, it's just going to go away because your immune system is already there and can handle it. But the viruses have learned to hide themselves when they can from your immune system. And the way the herpes do it, including Epstein-Barr, herpes simplex 1 and 2, is they hide in your own cells, in the body of the cell itself, so they can't be targeted until they're activated and they start to reproduce, and then they can be targeted and stopped. But once you have it, it will go to our grave with us.
The antibodies.
It's in a sense, the virus has kind of really figured things out good because it doesn't want to kill you because it ends up killing itself.
Mm.
Those type of viruses, it's in their best interest to spread, but not kill their host.
Well, and
So
even, I mean, the last time I had COVID in September, it was very different from the first time I had COVID. And my 8-year-old immune system was able to get over COVID on its own. But
that's interesting.
I didn't know I had it for 4 days. I didn't get a fever
Did
until
you
four
get the
days
COVID
in.
vaccine?
No, I've never been vaccinated
But
for
you've had
COVID.
COVID and then you got it again?
Hmm.
Yeah. So, one of the questionnaires in the questionnaire we'll be sending out is all about COVID because I'm very curious on that information from the patients.
Hmm. It was interesting how I didn't know I knew I didn't feel well. But it wasn't until 4 days in that I spiked a fever and finally went to urgent care just to get tested for what was going on. And they said,
Yeah.
"Oh, you've got COVID."
And then let me put a caveat in here. No physician goes out there saying they want to do bad to a patient. But there's so much to learn in medicine, in every subfield of medicine. Physicians don't know the flow of money or how they're being influenced by others, including the bureaucracy and the institution based on that flow of money. And that's what Kill Switch I want people to start to wake up to. And again, if I ever do the third volume, it'll be focused more on waking up to that broadly, not just how this came about with the vaccine world.
Well, and even just the changes, the systems changes that need to happen. Like when you talk about the genome has been sequenced since 1985, where we've understood DNA and how genomes play out, like why isn't medicine taking more the route of looking at our genomic sequencing and our mutations to figure out how medicine can best work with our individual
Oh, there are peoples and companies doing that. There definitely are.
and
So,
functional medicine,
yeah,
certainly,
so
right?
that
But
way, they can target the treatment and the dose instead of everybody getting one dose of one type of drug. And that type of individualized care, I have no doubt will come in the future.
I hope so.
Yeah,
It
there are
happens in
people very,
cancer treatment.
very
It's
cognitive.
happening in cancer treatments, I think,
Yeah,
now.
no, it's happening in a lot of different areas, and
Mm.
so the more as time goes on, more of that will come out. As a matter of fact, because of the advances in molecular biology, you can sequence an entire genome from rapidly at a much cheaper cost than what was originally done when the human genome was sequenced. So you can do it individually on people now.
Like I know I have genetic mutations that create a difficulty in eliminating heavy metals from my system. So I have retained gadolinium from all the MRIs I've had over the years. I have toxic levels of lead, mercury, cadmium, cesium, and gadolinium, right? And so
Good.
finding
Me too.
ways to eliminate those
Yeah. Did you enjoy my chapters on mercury and aluminum?
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, why are they? I mean, can we access vaccine? I believe we can access vaccines that don't have those additives. I believe I
Well,
requested them for my
yeah. So
child.
I talked about the history of mercury. Mercury was put in a vaccine because people were getting bacterial infections when they gave them the vaccine. The reason that happened is they would use one vial to vaccinate like 20 people. And so they keep putting the needle in for each new vaccine and they would contaminate it either with a bacteria or a fungus. So they needed to do something. Well, what you can do is just single vial. If you do one vial, that won't happen because when the vial is released according to FDA rules and good manufacturing procedures, you have to show sterility. It's afterwards when they kept putting the needle into the same vial that happened. But rather than just make a single vial, they wanted to do 20 shots per vial because it was a lot cheaper and more profit. Instead of storing 20 vials, you can store just one and you can repeatedly access it and set it on the shelf. So what they came up with to put in there was mercury, because mercury would kill bacteria and uh, fungus. But mercury is toxic to all carbon-based life forms. And I bring that out in there, and you're just going to have to read that chapter to understand it. And that generated this controversy about autism, which is very controversial. And I bring out that controversy. There's not a definite conclusion from it. But the point is, there's never been a study by the FDA where they compared vaccines with mercury to single vial without mercury and then look at the incidence of autism. That's never been done, or other long-term problems. And you don't have to put the mercury in, just do the single vial. Now, as a result of the Miramata disease, which I bring out in that chapter, which is really important, the toxicity and danger of mercury has been recognized. And so, they've taken mercury out of vaccines for children under 6 or pregnant women. It's a highly neurotoxic formulation. Any of the methylated mercuries, which is what the mercury vaccine is, it's an ethyl mercury thimerosal. It's highly, highly neurotoxic, and everybody knows that. The question that's debatable, because the uh, epidemiology studies don't show a correlation with autism, is can it cause autism? That's where the controversy is. But based on what was discovered in Minamata by the Environmental Protection Agency, what was the baseline considered safe for human exposure was 4 times below what the World Health Organization and FDA and CDC was saying. So all of a sudden you had a different government agency saying, no, your level, what is acceptable safe has to be 4 times lower, which means children were getting an accumulated dose much higher than the EPA said was safe for neurons. And so they then amended and started taking it out. And under RFK, which there's a controversy around RFK, but under him, they've just done away with these multi-vial vaccines. So you can still get the vaccine, but it won't have mercury in it. It's going to cost a little more, but you're rid of the mercury issue. And it just kind of makes sense if you can do it a safer way, even if it costs a little more. That's a better way to do it. And but that again, because of the flow of money, it
Mhm.
was resisted, and the debate was kind of perverted. It was never about not getting a vaccine. It was about not getting a multivial vaccine that
With
that had
mercury.
mercury. You can get a single vial of the same vaccine, like influenza, that doesn't have mercury because it's not put in single vials. It was never needed there.
I think I requested those childhood vaccines for my child when she was an infant. I requested them without mercury and the additives, and I was able to secure them. Just took some time and special scheduling and, an inconvenient thing, but I didn't want to expose her to that potential toxicity.
Again, I think the take home is when there's an issue and confusion, look at the flow of money. It'll help straighten things out.
Well,
There,
and
there are other ways to solve the problem, but it goes against the flow of money. And that's the issue that is not being presented up front with informed consent for people to understand. And that's why I wrote Kill Switch. I want people to understand that.
become their own best self advocate.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's what has to happen, and that's goes against what I believe is a profession, where the physician looks out for your financial benefit as much, but the way everything's become so subspecialized, and it's and the way it's controlled from the top down by the administrators, uh, the patients can get lost because the only advocate the patient has in the system is that doctor in front of them. And if that doctor is an employee of that system, it compromises him. And unfortunately, more and more doctors are becoming or are now employees instead of an independent agent. And it's changed the field of medicine from a profession, which I love, into becoming an employee, which is detrimental to doctor-patient relationships and in your own heart, whether you're right or wrong, doing what you think is in the best interest of your patient,
I
because
appreciate.
because you're influenced from above. And I've seen that in my lifetime too. It's just something, people need to be aware of. First of all, that's the first way to bring about change, awareness.
That's the truth and information.
So I
Thank
strongly recommend to reviewers read Everyday Miracles, read Kill Switch. Maybe someday there'll be the third book. I already know the name of it if I write it, but I can't write it now because I got to focus on this other stuff.
Well, we appreciate your devotion and dedication to patients and well, well-being and humanity. I appreciate you modeling that power of inquiry and humility and care for humanity.
Well,
Thank you for
thank
being
you.
with us here,
It's a,
Dr. Burt,
it's a privilege for me, and I want to live up to that privilege.
and for us. Certainly with HSCT Warriors, we're just trying to promote awareness of HSCT, but also access to valuable and accurate information. So thank you for being with us
All right.
today, and we'll continue the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take good care of yourself.
Okay. Bye bye.